This is the WeltKrieg. We're looking at the Eastern Front duration game, and this is the situation at the end of November 1914. We'll go over to the demoralisation tracks and have a look at what's going on here. The Turks have only just started. They've got a rating of 7. We've got Russians in the Caucasus with 2. We've got Germany at 120, Austria at 161, and Russia at 241. So you can see there's been quite a lot of fighting going on, but I'd say the Russians are probably having the worst of it, but they've been doing a vast amount of fighting in terms of attacking in the last, particularly in this last month. So let's go down to the new front that we've introduced in November. Now, this one, there's not been a lot going on here. Both sides were out of contact. Admittedly, when I showed that first video of this map, I didn't really... I had it set up wrong. I had it set up as the scenario, 1914 November scenario, not as the duration game. Now, oddly enough, they both start at the same time, as far as I can see, but the duration game, the two sides weren't in initial contact. Anyway, so the two sides, I'm not really bothered about that at the moment. It's neither here nor there, but the two sides have moved into contact. The Russians have really stayed on the defensive, even though they've slightly crossed the border heading to this Zerum fortress here. But it was the Turks who consolidated their forces and attacked. They launched a couple of attacks which were pretty dreadful. They lost 7 strength points for the Russian 2. So it's just bad terrain, attacking against these mountainous and mountainous rough terrain, especially if you're not rolling very well, which they didn't do. It really sort of stunned the Turks for the moment. So in the second half of the month, they spent more time bringing in units to try and sort of build up enough force to have another go and attack. They're certainly not going to do what they did historically, because it's just going to completely wreck the Third Army, but they're pretty much stymied, and I can't see a lot happening on this front. One thing I may not have mentioned is the railway that goes from Tiflis here down to Sarjakamis is actually is complete. The railhead goes to Sarjakamis. Even though there is a rail track marked on here to Erzurum, that has to be built, obviously built by the Russians. I mentioned the fact that depots before. The main difference between supply on this map and supply on the other maps is the fact you have attrition, that if you do not have a line of communication, which is pretty much any length so long as it doesn't cross desert and stuff like that, two-way supply source, which is either your HQs, your depots, or rail hexes, or edge of map board stuff, that you have to roll for attrition. Now, the Russians aren't that good at rolling for attrition. The Turks are a little bit better because they were used to operating with a much smaller supply line. Is it small supply overhead? I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Now, if we look at what's happened in Serbian front, Austrian offensives pretty much ground to a halt. They did take a hex back, and they actually attacked the first time that trenches were attacked in this game, and it was after a couple of goes, it was the first time that trenches were actually overcome, I think. Yeah. So apart from that, the big problem that Austria's had is the fact that their army's collapsing in Galicia. So units are being dragged away from the Serbian front and sent north. There's quite a few units on the railways here that are heading north. Some of the best units from the Serbian Second Army and Serbian Fifth Army are heading north to Galicia to try and stop this whole front from collapsing. The Serbians have been fairly quiet. They've received some reinforcements. They get some supplies coming in at the start of this term, but there's not a lot going on there. But they haven't got the capability to launch serious offensives. But they're holding the ground pretty well. And unless things change radically in Galicia, I can't see there's going to be much pressure put on the Serbians. Now, if we go to the main front, let's start looking at East Prussia. It's been pretty much a stalemate in East Prussia. The Germans and the Russians sort of exchanging blows with each other. The Russians are attacking, but they're attacking without supply. The Germans have got a reasonable amount of supply, but they're much weaker in numbers, although they are getting stronger. 4 divisions from the Western Front have arrived in the last few turns. That's the first of many, I would imagine. Unfortunately, they've not really been deployed here, though all the replacements have been deployed here. But what has happened, another German army that arrived as a reinforcement, it started off over here in Prussia, but ended up getting dragged down to the Galician front because trying to bolster the sort of Austrians who are under a lot of pressure here. We've had sporadic little skirmishes going on along this German sort of Russian border here, but it's been very small forces, mainly cavalry and a few infantry, so no great movement there. There's been a fair amount of fighting all the way along this part of the East Prussian front, with the Germans gradually getting the better of the Russians, but that's because the Russians have been moving their reinforcements and replacements primarily to the Galician front. So, as I said, we mentioned this German armies appeared here to try and bolster the left flank. Now, the rules state you're only allowed a certain number of German divisions. You're allowed a total of 4 divisions. So I've got a couple of brigades and 3 main divisions fighting here in support of the Austrians. You have to have a certain amount of Austrian demoralisation before the Austrian High Command will swallow its pride and let the Germans come to their rescue. If we look at the situation in Western Galicia, the Russians have just about pushed the Austrians completely out of Galicia, so that they've gained a lot of ground because the front line was running along this river at one point here, so it's completely collapsed and been forced back there. The front line did go up along the Vistula here and that river there. Even that, because the flanks have collapsed, they've had to fall back from there as well. Russian pressure is sort of lapping round Chemsil. This Chemsil's a tough nut to crack. There is a lot of artillery in that area now, but Russians have got no ammunition that they can use to start battering those forts down. They're going to try and sort of push round the forts and hopefully surround them and force the Austrians back. And to say the Austrians have been desperate situation, mainly because the Russians have been receiving huge amounts of reinforcements and a lot of replacements. So even though they are getting beaten up, as you can see from their demoralisation track, it's not really showing in the actual numbers on the board that they're keeping steady, because they're just feeding in more and more troops. If we go a little bit further along the front here, there's been some minor movement. It's difficult. There was the trench lines in certain areas here, and some of the trenches were attacked, and trenches actually fell in a couple of areas, and trenches were also abandoned in a few areas as well due to the collapse of the Austrian positions around here. They're still pretty static along this line here, but Russians are gradually starting to move their railheads closer. They can repair railways on odd turns, so that's having an effect in moving their infrastructure closer to the front. Back in this position here in Prussia, there were some German fortifications that were basically they'd been isolated for such a time that it triggered the fortress surrender. The Germans got rid of one of the forts and two of the others surrendered. There's another fort that's also quite a big one that's starting to have to roll for surrender. So it was rolling 2 dice. It was a 2 this turn. It goes up 1 each turn. So that's good. Other things, the Germans have been gradually dismantling their forts to get extra replacement units. This is to bolster their numbers, because the Russians have put them in quite a bit of pressure. The German army at one point was weakening, even though it has got superior supply. It's the only area of the board where the units have got enough supply to conduct proper operations. The problem was that they didn't have the troops to do that. Okay, and that's the end of it. Start of winter. Next turn, there's probably a few other factors kicking in. I have a little chart of things that might happen. I don't know where it is, otherwise I could give you a review of potentially. It's over here, just let me get it. Sorry about that, all that moving around. So let's have a look what we've got here. This tells you when ammunition starts pouring in from the factories. It also gives you information on any specific events that happen. Serbia, no, nothing happening in December. December 14. Well, that's interesting. Russia start getting their monthly supply of ammunition. That's fair enough. So, rail, solid defences, that doesn't come in. As I said, winter clicks in on December the 1st. November 14, non-Russian forts. We've already discussed that. Can be broken down. December 14th, yeah, that's interesting. Ottomans start to get, but that might be if we're playing, I think that's if you're playing the full Ottoman game, which we're not here. Anything else? Gas. No, I missed that, and that's gas 1914, September. You're allowed to roll for gas. Gas attacks, it's pretty rare. Now that's something from the Grand Campaign game, which I've decided to include. I've included air attacks as well. Trenches. No, I can't see anything else going on here that starts in December. A lot of this is stuff that was applicable to not the Grand Campaign, but the complete duration game, which I'm not playing. I'm not playing the Western Front and stuff like that, and I'm not playing all the Ottoman fronts. December 15th, first turn of the month. Alright, that's Britain. Ammunition supplies. It's not applicable. Right. Okay. What about Germany? Let me have a quick look at Germany when their supplies start coming in. So ammunition starts arriving in February for Germans. Yeah, there's some stuff about replacement schedules. That's it. So there's not a huge amount going on in December on the next term. Okay, it's been a very long, a long status report.